A Feast of Lanterns. By L. Cranmer-Byng. Editorial Note. The object of the editors of this series is a very definite one. They desire above all things that, in their humble way, these books shall be the ambassadors of goodwill and understanding between East and West, the old world of thought and the new of action. In this endeavor, and in their own sphere, they are but followers of the highest example in the land. They are confident that a deeper knowledge of the great ideals and lofty philosophy of Oriental thought may help to a revival of that true spirit of charity which neither despises nor fears the nations of another creed and color. L. Cranmer-Byng. S. A. Kapadia. Northbrook Society. 21, Cromwell Road. S. Kensington, S.W. I am indebted to the editors of The Nation, the English Review, and the Poetry Review, for their kind permission to reproduce several of the poems included in the book. My thanks are also due to Dr. Lionel Giles for the great help and assistance he has given me, notably in translations from Liu Ch and Chü-i, also to Mr. H. H. Harding for his valuable translations of many selections from the Sung poets. I owe the inclusion of Yuan Mei's last poem on the last page to the late Mr. Ken Hoshino, translator of Kaibara Ekin's Way of Contentment in this series. L. C. B. How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit CompleteAudiobooks.com for more quality content. Introduction. In spring, for sheer delight, sang Yuan Mei, I set the lanterns swinging through the trees. This was no formal feast of lanterns held in the first month of the year, but his own private affair, the lonely ritual of a spring worshipper and garden anchorite. Perhaps those who loved him, and they were many, wandered his pleached alleys and maple groves and admired the lanterns with their red dragons that leaped and plunged in gold and silver seas. But I like to think that the guests were gone in long procession of gleaming boats when the old rose-master looked on his garden and found it whiter and fairer than the far-off moon. At once you guessed the whole charm and weakness of Chinese poetry. Here is the narrow moon garden of its range, its myriad dragons shoaling through unreal seas, its peonies with the souls of mandarins and chrysanthemums with the shadows of children. Yet this sense of limitation and unreality belongs only to the surface. Within this little space lies a vast world open to us through symbols. Moon. The moon hangs low over the old continent of Chinese poetry. Tung-P'o, moon goddess, is the beautiful pale watcher of the human drama, and all that she has known of secret things, of passion and pleasure, swift ruin and slow decay, she records in music. Through her great palaces of cold drift the broken melodies of unrecorded lives. She is the goddess alike of sorrow and love, of Chü-i who in exile hears only the lurking cuckoo's blood-stained note, the gibbon's mournful wail, and Chang-jo who rides triumphant on a moonbeam into the darkened chamber of his lady's sleep. Her rays are more persistent than water, you may draw the curtains and think you have shut out night with all its whispering of leaves, but a tiny crevice will let her in. Best of all the poets loved her when she lingered above the broken courts and roofless halls of vanished kings. Time and Nemesis wrote large upon their walls, but moonlight brought them a glamour unknown to history, and cast a silver mantle lightly upon their dust. They were what Tu-Fu and Meng Hao Jian willed, bright shadows in the rose alleys of romance. Gods of war and builders of their dreams in stone. At least one singer prayed the moon that his passionate heart might haunt the ruins of Chang'an, a nightingale. All sacred intimacies and desires that dare not clothe themselves in words have her confidence, and because she is goddess as well as woman she will never betray them. She links together the thoughts of lovers separated by 100 hills, and the lonely places of despair are steeped in her kindness. On the 15th of the 8th month she graciously descends from her domain, vast, cold, pure, unsubstantial, and grants the desires of all who await her coming. Lastly, she is the link between the present and the past, binding us in the solemn hours to the men or women who have lived and wrought beneath her spell. One Chinese poet, remembering in moonlight the lovers of long ago, prayed that lovers yet to come might also remember him. 200 years had flown, and after a night of splendor some woodman passing at dawn found a double lotus on a broken tomb. And Kyuso Muro, the Japanese philosopher, has written, "It is the moon which lights generation after generation, and now shines in the sky." So may we call it the memento of the generations. As we look upon it, and think of the things of old, we seem to see the reflections of the forms and faces of the past. Though the moon says not a word, yet it speaks. If we have forgotten them, it recalls the ages gone by. The present is the past to the future, and in that age someone like me will grieve as he looks upon the moon. Flowers. In the time of the Tang dynasty there lived a retired scholar whose name was Yuan Mei. He never married, but dwelt alone, yet his companions were books and flowers, his little friends. If he had any enemies, they were frost and wind and blight and mildew. 3 seasons brought him joy and 1 sorrow. Love to him meant the gentle opening of rose petals, and death their fall. The neighbors never troubled about him, for how could there be scandal between a man and flowers? No woman ever plundered his garden and desecrated his temple of abiding peace. In fine, he was the happiest man that ever lived. Then something came to pass. It was blue night, and the garden never looked whiter underneath the moon. And every tree melted into the spirit of a tree peering between its luminous leaves. The Wu Tiang whispered to the maple, and the maple passed the story round to the mountain pine of the phoenix that augustly condescended to rest in its branches some long-forgotten spring. Only the old willow stood apart and said nothing, for the willow is a wizard, and the older he gets the more crabbed and silent he becomes. The owner of the garden stood spellbound in the moonlight. Suddenly a blue shadow flitted shyly from among the flowers, and a lady in a long robe of palest blue came towards him and bowed. "I live not far from here," said she. "And in passing to visit my august aunt I felt a longing to rest in your beautiful garden." The wondering philosopher stammered his consent, and instantly a band of pretty girls appeared, some carrying flowers and some willow boughs. According to etiquette an introduction became necessary. Then a girl in green announced herself, "I am called Aspen," and, pointing to a girl in white, "Her name is Plum," to one in purple, "She is called Peach," and so she went on till the last, a little maid in crimson who was called Pomegranate. The Lady Wind, who, she explained, was their maternal aunt 18 times removed, had promised them a visit which for some reason she had delayed. As tonight's moon was unusually bright, they had decided to visit her instead. Just at that instant the Lady Wind was announced, and, with a great fluttering of many-colored silks, the girls trooped out to greet her and one and all implored her to stay with them in the garden. Meanwhile, Mr. Yuan Mei had discreetly retired into the shadow. But when the august aunt asked who the owner was he stepped boldly into the moonlight and saw a lady of surpassing grace with a certain gauzy floating appearance like gossamer. But her words chilled him, for they were like the cold breath stirring the leaves of a black forest, and so he shivered. However, with the true politeness of a Chinese host, he invited her into his contemptible pavilion of abiding peace, where he was astonished to find a magnificent banquet already prepared. So they feasted and sang, and I am sorry to say that many cups went round, and the Lady Wind became both critical and extravagant. She condemned 2 unfortunate singers to pay forfeit by drinking a full goblet apiece, but her hands shook so as she held the goblets out that they slipped from her grasp and fell with a crash to the floor. And much wine was spilled over poor little Pomegranate, who had appeared for the first time in her new embroidered crimson robe. Pomegranate, being a girl of spirit, was naturally annoyed, and, telling her sisters they could court their aunt themselves, she blushed herself off. The Lady Wind, in a great rage, cried out that she had been insulted, and, though they all tried to calm her, she gathered her robe about her and out of the door she flew off hissing to the east. Then all the girls came before their flower philosopher and bowed and swayed sorrowfully and said farewell, and, floating through the portals, vanished into the white parterres around, and when Mr. Yuan Mei looked, lo, the temple of abiding peace was empty as all temples of its kind should be. And he sat down to wonder if it was a dream. For every trace of the feast was gone, and yet a faint subtle fragrance lingered as though some gracious and flower-like presence had been once a guest. Next night, when strolling in his garden, he was suddenly encircled by his little friends. They were all busy discussing the conduct of Pomegranate and urging her to apologize to the august aunt 18 times removed. It was evident that they went in fear of her since last night's unfortunate revel. But little red Pomegranate would have no truck with Aunt Wind, who had spoilt her nice new robe. "Here is one who will protect us from any harm," she cried, pointing to the surrounded form of Mr. Hsiu. So they told him how each year they were injured by spiteful gales and how Aunt Wind had to some extent protected them. Mr. Hsiu was sorely puzzled. "How can this contemptible one afford protection?" he asked. Pomegranate explained. It was such a very little thing required of him, just to prepare a crimson flag embroidered with sun, moon, and stars in gold and hoisted east of the garden at dawn on the first morning of each new year, then all hurricanes would pass them by. Accordingly, he promised, and the next day saw him stitching golden stars on a crimson background. And he rose early, an hour before the dawn on the appointed day, and set his flag duly towards the east in the breath of a light east wind. Suddenly a great storm gathered and broke. The world rocked. The air was dark with flying stones and whirling dust. The giants of the forest cracked, others were overwhelmed. But in Mr. Hsiu's garden there was a deep calm. Not a flower stirred. Then in a flash he understood. His little friends whom he had saved from destruction were the souls of his little flowers. That night, when the moon was midway, they came to him with garlands of peach and plum blossom whose taste conferred the beauty of everlasting youth. Mr. Hsiu partook of the petals, and straightway the lingering drift of old sorrows from the days of his ignorance melted like snow from his heart. And with it went all the pathetic rubbish that even a flower philosopher allows to accumulate. He became young and divinely empty, yet in his soul pulsed the elan vital of Mr. Henri Bergson. Soon afterwards, says the ancient chronicle, he attained to a knowledge of the true way, and shared the immortality of the genii. 1. This story is typical of many. In the West it would be passed by as a pretty if rather naive and simple fairy tale. Yet behind all Chinese poetry and folklore, underlying all art, is the ancient philosophy of the true way. And this is the way of happiness according to Luan. Most men are vexed and miserable because they do not use their hearts in the enjoyment of outward things, but use outward things as a means of delighting their hearts. To enjoy is to have the affinity to understand, the persistence to enter, and finally the power to reproduce. All that we love we reproduce, and so it is with flowers, the best beloved of Mr. Hsiu. It is that delicate sense of touch between life and life, between soul and soul, that alone enables the artist to give, not the imitation of a living flower, but the flower itself, reborn within him, and therefore his own child. And what was this immortality the genii bequeathed to Hsiu except the sense of eternal youth that comes when kinship and affinity with the little bright children of nature is established? And so the philosopher has joined the immortals, and lives in the sister realms of poetry and fairy lore, and every garden lover sees him walking by moonlight surrounded by his fairy flowers. Outside, Aunt Wind, that shrill hater of all things beautiful, betrayer of woodland secrets, beats vainly at the magic barrier, a little crimson flag. Dragons. The dragon is one of the 4 spiritually endowed creatures of China, the others being the unicorn, the phoenix, and the tortoise. There are 4 principal lung, or dragons: the celestial dragon, which supports and guards the mansions of the gods, the spiritual dragon, which causes the winds to blow and the rains to fall. The earth dragon, which marks out the courses of rivers and streams, and the dragon of the hidden treasure, which watches over wealth concealed from mortals. Here, however, we are chiefly concerned with the significance of the dragon in connection with Chinese art and literature. From earliest times it has been associated in the Chinese mind with the element of water. Most of the great philosophers have used this element by way of illustration, but Luan, the mystical prince of Huainan, has epitomized all that his countrymen ever felt or expressed on the subject. There is nothing in the world so weak as water. Yet its experience is such that it has no bounds, its depth such that it cannot be fathomed. In length it is without limit, in distance it has no shores, in its flows and ebbs, its increase and decrease, it is measureless. When it rises to heaven, it produces rain and dew, when it falls upon the earth, it gives richness and moisture, there is no creature in the world to whom it does not impart life, and nothing that it does not bring to completion. It holds all things in its wide embrace with perfect impartiality, its graciousness extends even to creeping things and tiny insects, without any expectation of reward. Its wealth is sufficient to supply the wants of the whole world, without fear of exhaustion, its virtue is bestowed upon the people at large, and yet there is no waste. Its flow is ever onward, ceaseless and unlimited. Its subtlety such that it cannot be grasped in the hand. Strike it, you hurt it not, stab it, you cause no wound, cut it, you cannot sever it in twain, apply fire to it, it will not burn. Whether it runs deep or shallow, seen or unseen, taking different directions, flowing this way and that, without order or design, it can never be utterly dispersed. Its cutting power is such that it will work its way through stone and metal. Its strength so great that the whole world is succored by it. It floats lazily through the regions of formlessness, soaring and fluttering above the realms of obscurity. It worms its way backwards and forwards among valleys and watercourses, it seethes and overflows its bank in vast and desert wilds. Whether there be a superfluity of it, or a scarcity, the world is supplied according to its requirements for receiving and for imparting moisture to created things, without respect to precedence in time. Wherefore there is nothing either generous or mean about it, for it flows and rushes with echoing reverberations throughout the vast expanse of earth and heaven. If you close your eyes after reading this passage, you will see in a vision the flight of the Chinese dragon, soaring and fluttering above the realms of obscurity. He is greater than Leviathan, that crooked serpent, the storm dragon, greater than Tannin, dragon of the streaming rain, greater than Rahab, devourer of the westering sun, or Babylonian Tiamat, also the dragon deep. For these are the rude imaginings of early religionists, and no more resemble him than primitive scratchings on rock or bone resemble the vast brood of Sekko, who, in olden time fancied dragons, painted them, and spent days and nights in loving them. The former stand for chaos and rebellion, but the Chinese lung is the ascending one, rising to power through adaptability to change, recoiling upon himself only to produce new forms. The dragon, says Quan Tzu, becomes it will reduce to the size of a silkworm or swollen till it fills the space of heaven and earth. It desires to mount, and it rises until it affronts the clouds. To sink, and it descends until hidden below the fountains of the deep. And so, from a symbol of spiritual power from whom no secrets are hidden, this dragon becomes a symbol of the human soul in its divine adventure, climbing aloft on spiral gusts of wind, passing over hills and streams, treading in the air, and soaring higher than the Kwanlun mountains, bursting open the gate of heaven, and entering the palace of God. The symbol suggests, and all Chinese poetry is the poetry of suggestion. A poem is not merely inspired, but inspiring. It implies collaboration between the poet and his audience. Poetry, according to a Chinese commentator, is designed to raise the reader to a plane of mental ecstasy known to the Buddhists as samadhi. No great poem finishes when the last line is brought to a close. The poet has merely propounded a theme which the reader continues, each stanza is but the unclosing of a door whose last swings out upon the eternal quest. Through the glimpse vouchsafed to us we ourselves become visionaries. In most early Chinese poems the influence of Taoism, the nature philosophy of Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu, is felt. With a philosophy based upon the words of Chuang Tzu, the true sage, taking his stand upon the beauty of the universe, pierces the principle of things. It is small wonder that the broad stream of speculative thought found its final outlet in Chinese art and poetry. Its three most precious jewels were weakness, emptiness, and humility, and their earthly counterparts water, space, and flowers. To have the attributes of these three was to become a Taoist. Artists and poets were the anchorites of Tao, and the secret places of nature their shrines. The savage transports of Alexandrian fanatics, the sensual raptures of later mysticism, and the torture lusts of Indian fakirs never shook them from their indomitable calm. The winds brought them romance from 100 moonlit miles, or sped them adventuring on strange waters. For music they had the waterfall and the twilight orchestras of birds preluding the dramas of dawn or shadow plays of night. The souls of these ancient rishis and arhats were caravanserais of cheer for men, and their minds still waters reflecting the brief moonlight, the passing cloud. And the blossom ere it fell, yet I should be the last to convey the idea that all Chinese poets and artists were anchorites. In the 3rd century AD, one of the earliest literary coteries known to history, the 7 sages of the bamboo grove, found a common inspiration in wine. Wang Chi, of the 7th century, was known as the 5-bottle scholar. Liu Ch, and his contemporary Tung-P'o, were both hard drinkers. Moreover, many of China's greatest poets were also her greatest statesmen. This is especially true of the Tang dynasties, which produced Wang Qian, Han Yu, and Chü-i, and the Sung, which includes Wang and Hsi, the great social reformer and poet, Su Tung-P'o, and, to a lesser degree, others innumerable. Such a combination would be almost impossible in the West, and it is difficult to recall any name that is associated imperishably with both. Yet the following passage from the writings of Chuang Tzu will show clearly how the men of ancient China attained their dual citizenship and achieved greatness in 2 worlds through the doctrine of the guarded life. Outwardly you may adapt yourself, but inwardly you must keep to your own standard. In this there are 2 points to be guarded against. You must not let the outward adaptation penetrate within, nor the inward standard manifest itself without. In the former case you will fall, you will be obliterated, you will collapse, you will lie prostrate. In the latter case you will be a sound, a name, a bogey, an uncanny thing. And of those who carried out these precepts he says, they seemed to be of the world around them, while proudly treading beyond its limits. They saw in penal laws a trunk, in social ceremonies wings, in wisdom a useful accessory, in morality a guide. For them penal laws meant a merciful administration, social ceremonies, a passport through the world, wisdom, an excuse for doing what they could not help, and morality, walking like others upon the path. Sources of inspiration. Once upon a time the Emperor Yuan Sung, of the Tang dynasty, had imperial ink called dragon fragrance. One day he saw in the ink little Taoist priests like flies walking about. They called out to him, "O king! Live forever! Your servants are the spiritual essence of the ink, the ambassadors of the black pine. Whoever in this world has literary powers must have 12 of us dragon guests in his ink." This is the story of the ink taken from an ancient collection called Tan Qing. Even materials of a genius must be touched with magic and informed with life. All Chinese reverence flowed into ancestor worship on the one hand, or into art and poetry on the other. In their religious emotions the Chinese look backward as well as forward. For, as Dr. Hubbard has pointed out in his Fate of Empires, the Chinaman, through the long chain of those, his own proximate creators, who have gone before him, worships the ultimate creator. And something of this ancestor worship creeps also into his creative art. He is haunted, as I have written of Tung-P'o, in a previous book, by the vast shadow of a past without historians, a past that is legendary, unmapped, and unbounded. He is haunted by the traditional voices of the old masters of his craft. And lastly, more than all by the dead women and men of his race, the ancestors that count in the making of his composite soul and have their silent say in every action, thought, and impulse of his life. If you would dive into the wellsprings of Chinese poetry you must go deep into its legends and folklore. Many of their greatest poems have broadened out from a tiny source. The following, which is after all but a wreath of mist, a puff of wind, and a sprinkle of rain, has nevertheless been a constant inspiration. In times of old Prince Wei, who had visited the mountains Cao Tang, fell into a tired sleep. In his dreams a lovely girl came gliding down and addressed him, "I am the lady of the Witch's Mountain, a wanderer of Cao Tang. Hearing that you, my lord, have visited this spot, I fain would spread for you the mat and pillow." The prince shared his couch with the fairy, who afterwards, as she bade farewell to her royal lover, faded singing. My home is on the sunlit side of the Witch's Mountain. And I dwell on the peaks of Khao Tang. At dawn I marshal the morning clouds. And at night I summon the rain. Every morn and every night, at the bright tower's foot. Modern criticism has charged many of the great poets, especially of the Tang dynasty, with being plagiarists. Perhaps we shall never know how much the poets of a less chronicled age were indebted to the legends and ballads of the nameless Meistersingers of a still simpler past, who sang, not for fame, nor even the remembrance of bright hours, but only because their hearts were full of song. But we know that the poetry of the Tang dynasty contains countless allusions to ancient legend, and Liu Ch did not hesitate to take some old theme, worn by time and transmission to an echo that lingered in obscure valleys, and sing it clearly to his own gracious music. So that the old ballad became a modern lyric, or rather revived anew like, the spring's eternal story, that was old and is young again. He takes, for example, the little four-line poem sung by the peasants of Korea in the rice fields, and called, Leading with the Guitar. The story is very simple. In Korea, a ferryman once got up early and fastened his boat to a bamboo pole on the bank. An old man with crazy brain, and hair floating in the wind, appeared. He carried a bowl in his hand, and, stepping into the stream, would pass over. His wife followed to draw him back. She could not reach him. He fell in and was drowned. His wife took a guitar and beat the strings, singing as she did so, Aged man, there is nothing by which you can cross the stream. Her singing was very sad, and when it was done she also threw herself into the river, and died. The ferryman went home and told his wife, Lin Yu. Lin Yu was much affected, and made a poem to accompany the guitar. This was the 16-character poem for 4 lines that they still sing in Korea to the present day. Liu Ch took the dry bones of this bare little narrative, and tragedy looks out of the eyes and calls with the voice of the wife, Old man, there is no way to cross the river. If you venture you may take hold of a tiger, but the river is hard to trust to. The aged man fell in, he died in the river, and floated down the stream. Out upon the sea are great whales, their white teeth are like the snowy mountains. Aged sir, will you hang there upon those mountains? Suddenly the hard and brilliant notes of the song become silent. Grief for the husband is merged into pity for the wife, then the merest cadence follows, with its one eventful line, that guitar has a sorrowful tone, and there is no returning. History and legend are more often than not interwoven. An emperor like Ming Huang of the Tang dynasty, whose splendor and sorrowful romance still glow in the poems of Tung-P'o, Liu Ch, and Chü-i, is immortal. He has but to step over the borders of his empire into Hero Land. He sails with his imperishable consort in the black-winged junk seamed with stars on a far quest to the Fortunate Isles. And lonely fishermen drifting through the sea mist have brushed with their keels the shores of Peng Lai, Island of the Blessed, and heard the tones of a lute of jade and the voice of his celestial majesty singing to the Lady Yang Kui Fei Li Po's song of the scented balcony. The cup of poison given to Luan by history became the elixir of immortality in legend, and straightway he soared to heaven in broad day, followed by a miscellany of dogs and poultry on whom the cup and its dregs had descended. It is even possible for a name to pass utterly from record of the historians and yet live through tradition. And the poets of China have conferred many a cup of immortality on some faint celestial shadow or fading hillside ghost. Chinese verse form. In a previous book, A Lute of Jade, I have referred to the structure of Chinese verse. It is necessary to remember that the Chinese language is made up mostly of monosyllabic words expressing root ideas. There are also a sufficient number of diphthongs to give variety. As Sir John Davis points out in his Poetry of the Chinese, such words as seen and lean correspond nearly to the English lion and fluid. Chinese is essentially a language in which vowel sounds prevail and the few consonants are far from being harsh. In the literary language, used by all the great poets, the only terminal consonant is n, as in chun, and its nasal ing, as in hong. The only harsh initial is ts, as in sin and tsc. There are only about 400 different sounds in Chinese, and, in order to discriminate between words of similar sound, resort has to be made to tones which are akin to musical notes. Of these tones only two count in the making of Chinese poetry, namely, the ping, or even tone, and se, or accentuated, with its three modifications known as shangsheng, the rising note, kusheng, the entering note, and rusheng, the sinking note. These tones, as Mr. Charles Budd points out too in his interesting essay on the technique of Chinese poetry, are used to make rhythm as well as to express meaning. Rhymes occur in the even lines of a poem. In 5-syllable verses there is a caesura which comes after the second syllable, and in poems of 7 syllables after the fourth. Another form of Chinese verse construction is that of parallel lines. This particular form is well known to us in Hebrew poetry, especially the Psalms. It does not follow that each word and line should answer its fellow, but there must be a marked correspondence and equality in the construction of the lines, such as noun answering to noun, verb to verb, etc. The following is an example quoted by Sir John Davis in his essay on the poetry of the Chinese. 100, 1,000, 10,000 projects are hard to accomplish. 5 times, 6 times, 10 years very soon arrive. When you have found a day to be idle for a day. When you have met with 3 cups to drink, then drink your 3 cups. Chinese poems generally consist of 4, 8, 12, or 16 lines. There are, indeed, longer poems, but the whole idea of a Chinese poet is to condense and suggest. Professor Giles says, there is no such a thing as an epic in the language. As regards meter, the 4-character line is chiefly confined to the ancient collection of national ballads made by Confucius and known as the Book of Odes. The usual meters of the great poets of the Tang dynasty were 5 and 7-character lines. These are called Chü-i, or regular poems. The 6 or 8-character line is only to be met with alternated with others in poems of irregular meter. Epochs in Chinese poetry. Great dynasties in China made for great art and literature largely under the influence of a national awakening. Expeditions and embassies to distant lands brought back new ideas. And, above all, the fusion of 2 widely different types of mind, the northern or Confucian type and the southern or Taoist, prevented thought from becoming too formalized and gave a new impetus to creative imagination. Small kingdoms meant perpetual warfare and militarism. Hence few names famous in literature will be found in the annals of dynasties like the Qi and early Sung. The poetical meters of each age vary according to the requirements of the period. In the beginning we find the short meter of the odes well adapted to the needs of a simpler civilization. Gradually, as society becomes more complex, the verse needs grow until finally the 5 and 7-character line of the Tang dynasty appears, and after that the form has become stereotyped. The great Sung poets continued the Tang tradition, but added little to it, and after them only a few flashes of original genius illumine here and there a dark horizon. The oldest period of all, that of the Odes, has a range of nearly 1,200 years, from 1765 to 585 BC. Towards the close of the Zhou dynasty, in the 4th century BC, Hsiu Yuan wrote his celebrated Li Sa, or Falling into Error. He may be called the father of the Chinese nature poets. The Han dynasty, BC 206 to AD 221, contains very little poetry of the first rank. Tao Chien belongs to the Eastern Xin dynasty, which lasted about 100 years, from 317 to 419 AD. This author has been comparatively neglected as yet by Western scholars. Many of his poems would be well worth translating. The Tang dynasty, 618 to 905 AD, is the golden age of Chinese poetry. Most of the famous poets belonged to this period. Li Pe, Tung-P'o, Chü-i, Hsiu, are only a few names mentioned at random. From 907 to 960 AD came the period of the 5 dynasties, with no great name outstanding. The Sung dynasty, from 960 to 1206 AD, ranks after the Tang as the second greatest epoch in Chinese literature. The most celebrated poets of this age were Ouyang Hsiu and Su Tung-P'o. The Mongol, or Yuan dynasty, lasted from 1206 to 1368 AD, and produced one great poet, Liu Chi. During the Ming dynasty, AD 1368 to 1644, novel writing was greatly in vogue, but there is nothing in the poetry of this period that would challenge comparison with the masterpieces of an earlier date. The Manchu dynasty, which began in AD 1644 and only recently ended, contains the names of Yuan Mei and Chü-i, whose Cantonese love songs, translated by Mr. Cecil Clementi, are fast becoming a classic. Conclusion. The great storehouse of Chinese poetry is still untouched. 48,900 are the collected poems of the Tang dynasty alone, and of these possibly some 300 or 400 have been translated into various European languages. As the Chinese have more than 40,000 ideographs, and a good Chinese scholar is one who can commit to memory about 8,000 or 9,000, the difficulties in the way of translation are obvious. Nor is it easy to find one who is both a profound linguist and a poet as well. One who is so deeply indebted as I am to the researches of the great sinologues of the 19th century is conscious of treading on delicate ground even in referring to the relations between scholarship and literature. The fact, however, remains, that with a few rare exceptions, the scholar has attempted too much. Poetry is poetry, whether it be written in Chinese ideographs or European characters, and no knowledge of Chinese will enable one to interpret the poet's message in another tongue. There is an Italian proverb which says that to translate is to traduce, and this is profoundly true of 99 translations out of 100. Before one line is placed on paper, the translator from the Chinese must have soaked himself in the traditions of the Chinese masters, their reticence, their power of suggestion, their wonderful color sense, and, above all, their affinity and identification with their subject. He might well study the methods of the Chinese painters, who never put brush to canvas before committing all essential details to memory. He might read the story of Wu Tao-tzu, the greatest of all Chinese masters, as told by Mr. Lawrence Binyon in The Flight of the Dragon. He was sent by the emperor to paint the scenery of a certain river. On his return, to everyone's surprise, he had no sketches to show. "I have it all," he said, "in my heart. The poems I have chosen to render belong chiefly to the school of landscape." This does not mean that Chinese poets avoided the grim realities of life and the ceaseless struggle for existence. Poets as far apart as Chu Yuan in the 4th century B.C. and Li Hua in the 9th century AD have given us battle pictures which have seldom been equaled. Both these mighty panoramas deal with the pomp and panoply of armed hosts, the shock of battle in the bleak plains of Tartary, and finally moonlight upon the quiet faces of the innumerable dead. In the time of the Tang's universal conscription obtained. Tu-Fu, in his famous poem, The Recruiter, gives a wonderful description of the deserted countryside from which all the menfolk had gone. Many soldiers were also poets, famous generals like Yo Fei, more often than not commanders of small military posts on the lonely caravan routes in Chinese Turkestan. Yet, after all, the deepest feeling of the Chinese poets is revealed in their word painting of woods and mountains and water. Chü-i, the great artist of the Sung dynasty, in his essay on painting, says, "Mountains make water their blood. Grass and trees their hair, mist and cloud their divine coloring. Water makes of mountains its face, of houses and fences its eyebrows and its eyes, and of fishermen its soul." And again of water he writes, "Water is a living thing, hence its form is deep and quiet, or soft and smooth, or broad and ocean-like, or thick like flesh, or circling like wings, or jetting and slender, rapid and violent like an arrow. Rich as a fountain upon the sky, or running down into the earth where fishermen lie at ease. Grass and trees on the river banks look joyous, and are like beautiful ladies under veils of mists and cloud, or sometimes bright and gleaming as the sun shines down the valley. Such are the living aspects of water." 3. The fishermen who become the soul of water are sages like Chang Chi Ho, and poets like Ouyang Hsiu of the solemn autumn dirge and moonlight threnody. In the picture of the latter exhibited a few years back at the British Museum, the face of the poet is fixed and calm. His eyes have taken in all beauty and externals, and his gaze has swept beyond them into the beauty beyond all vision. One with the movement of the boat, one with the mood of the glimmering waters and the surrender of the scented woods, he grasps 10,000 and secures one. Such were the Taoist fishermen of Chü-i. Drifting with the winds and the currents of great rivers, adventuring by unknown streams, they attained harmony, and their spoils are bright moments of the eternal mood caught in golden nets, flower fairies held in gossamer. Never has the earth been so worshipped by man. She was at once the unattainable mistress and goddess surrendering to mortal lover. And never a bell of solitary convent floated across the Chinese landscape but it brought some anchorite of ancient beauty to her shrine. When the sound of a bell is withdrawn till it fails in the green mists of twilight. Night and the dreamer pursuing his dream return through a myriad leaves. Lines from the tomb of an unknown woman. Taken from a tomb on the Fuqiu mountain district of Soqiao in the province of Jiangsu. The date of the poem is many centuries old. Mother of pity, hear my prayer. That in the endless round of birth, no more may break my heart on earth. Nor by the windless waters of the blest. Weary of rest. That drifting, I abide not anywhere. Yet if by karma's law I must resume this mantle of the dust. Grant me, I pray, one dewdrop from thy willow spray. And in the double lotus keep my hidden heart asleep. A word from the wind. From an ancient Chinese ballad of the 4th century A.D. There is someone of whom I keep thinking. There is someone whom I visit in my dreams. Though 100 hills stand sentinel between us. And the dark rage of 100 sunless streams. For the same bright moon is kind to us. And the same untrammeled wind to us. Daring 100 hills. Whispers the word that thrills. And the dust of my heart, laid bare, shows the lilies that linger there. Wang Wei. AD 699 to 759. A celebrated poet and doctor who served two masters, the Emperor Ming Huang and the rebel general An Lushan, and was eventually appointed governor of a province by the Emperor Suzong. It is recorded of An Lushan that he once asked him what kind of animal a poet was, and what purpose he served. Wang Wei shortly afterwards had his revenge when, called upon to sing at a rebel banquet, he improvised verses in honor of his former patron Ming Huang. While roses fall, dawn after dawn the last doth nearer bring. Ah! What avails the shy return of spring? Then fill the wine cup of today and let night and the roses fall, while we forget. Liu Tzu-Hui. AD 706 to 765. The greatest of all the Chinese lyrists, Liu Tzu-Hui was a child of nature and subject like her to infinite moods. He may perhaps be called a pessimist, but not in the sense that we call Schopenhauer and his school pessimists. His was a pessimism of contrasts, the brighter the day, the darker the shadow. His fault, if so exquisite a lyricist may be said to possess one, was that he never looked beyond a single cycle. With him, the spring arrives, he sees summer lengthen into autumn, and autumn fall before winter, but there, for him, the cycle ends. There is no return of spring. Like so many of his great contemporaries, Tu-Fu, Meng Hao Jian, and others, he bends low to catch a whisper of the past, some voice murmuring as in a dream from moonlit ruins foreboding the common lot of all. It has been said of him that he had no cure for sorrow but the forgetfulness that lurks in the wine cup. This is only true in part. When the littleness of man came into hopeless conflict with the vastness of destiny, there was but one way of escape for the poets and philosophers of China. It is called the return to harmony. It consists in identifying oneself with nature. Chuang-Tzu, the philosopher, knew this, Liu Tzu, the poet, felt it, and here is the conclusion, the futility of the wine cup and the call of great rivers. In vain we cleave the torrent's thread with steel. In vain we drink to drown the grief we feel. When man's desire with fate doth war, this avails alone. To hoist the sail and let the gale and the waters bear us on. So the poet, out of harmony with inexorable law, lets soul and body drift with the natural movements of the wind and the waves. Discord is silenced in the primitive music of the world. Along the stream, the rustling nightfall strews my gown with roses. And wine-flushed petals bring forgetfulness of shadow after shadow striding past. I arise with the stars exultantly and follow the sweep of the moon along the hushing stream, where no birds wake, only the far-drawn sigh of weary voices whispering farewell. The palace of Hsiu. No more the peach tree droops beneath the snow. Spring draws her breath the willow boughs among. The mango bird now maddens into song. And the swift-building swallows come and go. 'Tis the time of the long daydreams, when laughing May beams on the mats of slothful revelers play. 'Tis the time of glancing wings, and the dancing of moon moths whirling the hours away. When the golden-armored guardians are withdrawn, and pleasure haunts the rustling woods till dawn. A warm and perfumed wind strays through the palace blind, and wandering priss into some dim retreat, where every whisper stirs the heart to beat. Now all the gay parterres are rivals for the sun, that drains their jeweled goblets one by one, from dimpled terrace and green dewy stairs. And the water lily renders to the spring the wonder of her white unbosoming. Far away in the tall woods there is an oriole calling. There are shadows in the blue pavilion of dancers, and music rising and falling. In the month of peach bloom and plum bloom, in the silken screened recess, love is the burden of sweet voices, and the brief night melting, and the long caress. The two visits. Visit to the cold clear spring. Ah! When the darkness blinds the orb of day, this cold clear spring chatters my grief away. And, as the current whirls along, she lilts a little wordless song. This little wizard, clear and cold, echoes the thoughts I left untold. And for music I have the sound of the tall pines surging round. Visit to the white stream rapids. I crossed the white stream at its slender source, when dawn first cleft the tangle of the stars, and shook the darkness from her. And I saw, passing a while from the worn tracks of men, islands innumerable environed, in nature's colors gold and green. The sky laid the blue mirror of eternity upon the shining waters. One by one, the clouds sailed out to sea. My random thoughts went wandering where monsters silver-mailed flashed down their native streams. I sang the songs that swelled with noon and faltered with the dusk, and failed in the twilight. Then I sought the gleam of cottage eaves amid the moonlit fields. Spring rhapsodies. I delight. Once more heaven bids the plough-star drive before the spring, and turn its handle to the east. Spring, the blue harmonies of tumultuous waters, the fair fragrance of orchid sprays. Climb and look out and beyond. At once the eye retains the whole immeasurable expanse of the sea, and the slenderest film of the clouds. The soul streams out in ecstasy. Tears. My tears are falling. Of the gentle pure breeze I sing, of the waves. Of Chonlang are my songs. Of Lake Duncan are my dreams, and my sighs. For the riverlands of Oyas and Oyan. What a lightness of health is in my soul. 1. With the spring wafting of the wind, it soars away and flies I know not where. Yes. It soars, but whither I know not. And my thoughts are boundless. I am whelmed in a dream of this fairest of seasons. In a mood that dispels not. The whole plain heaves into bloom, what flowers! What sceneries! Ah! Fragrance of sweet herbs, my love and grief are for you. Sorrow, a sharp-edged knife, is sheathed in my heart. For these are the last of spring, the ending of spring's last days. Sadness of heart takes hold of me, and no light. Weariness. Away my thoughts. By the winding Kang, by the roaring rapids of Sion my plunging hands are hidden with fairy flowers, and still my thoughts have mastered me. Each year this picture is the same. Spring comes. The flowers bloom. But lo, there is an end of them, and change comes over spring. Swiftly, swiftly the long river speeds away its waters. I follow with my gaze the flowing waves, and in thought I pass with them to the east, to the very sea. Alas! 'Tis even so with spring, it stays not with us once its time has come. Soon, too soon will destiny send forth the breath of tottering age. Ah! That I cannot fling a long, long rope over the blue sky and bind with it the white orb of light as it rushes on to its setting. 2. Sadness. The east wind has returned. The green of the grass renews, and I know that spring is here. Streams unbound awake into the dance of life. Softly the weeping willow waves its long slim boughs. What sorrow is there in its movement? Light of the sky, most fair, most tender blue. Air of the sea, sweet-scented, fresh, green-tinged. Bright colors on the emerald, dreaming off into the distance in a half-seen veil, such was the earth. The little clouds hover lightly in the heights, each melting into the more radiant beyond. Headlong waters are gathered in headlong streams. My glance falls on the moss by the river bend. How delicate and swift its movements in the wind. Gauze of the wandering threads whirled here and there, my spirit is minded to escape and whirl along with you. O air and light! I am drunk with you. I am dazed, and I am plunged in sorrow. One who has hearkened to the waters roaring down from the heights of Lung, and faint voices from the land of Chin. One who has listened to the cries of monkeys on the shores of the Yangtze-Kiang, and the songs of the land of Pa, that renowned beauty Wang Chao Chun, who saw before her the last jasper gate of her native land. That renowned Chu poet singing the glories of the tinted maple wood. Ah! These new sorrow. And if I ascend, and, mindful of them, look out across the blue horizon, I feel the keen pang of grief that, piercing through me, finds my heart. The soul of man swells like a wave at the coming of spring. But there is also the sadness of springtime, which, like falling snow, distracts us. Both sorrow and joy throbbing and pulsing, a countless crowd of feelings are stirred and mingled together in this festival of perfume. What if I have a friend far away on the shores of the Xiang? Clouds part us and hide us from each other. Upon a little wave I shed the tears of separation. And, little wave going eastward, take to my friend my soul felt love. Oh! That I could grasp this golden light of spring, keep it and hoard it, a treasure trove of days for my fairest far-off friend. 3. Sorrow. Dawn reddens in the wake of night, but the days of our life return not. Sweet-scented orchids blot out the path, but they die in the drift of waters and their flowers are blotted out. The Yangtze-Kiang splashes through shelving maple woods. The eye contains a far horizon, but the wound of spring lies deep in the heart. O poet! Turn thee to the capital, to the men. Who shall make thee forget? Surely, the earth's sorrow for the passing of spring from her quiet places is overwhelming. Bright autumn tide. I climb the mountain of Chü-i. I look down on clear rivers. Coldly the Xian speeds along, cold as it widens to meet the sea. Clouds break into autumn tints, the skies are flaked with golden foam. I am now in the foreign regions of Tsin and Yu. And countless are the miles of the trackless way, brushed by the wings of birds alone. Lying between me and my native land. Now with its half-disk leaning upon some island. Sets the evening sun. The lake is beginning to glow. There soars the moon from the rim of the far-off sea. And all my thoughts are plunged into the hardy loveliness of autumn tide. Northward I wander in dream to Yen, southward I search for Yuye. The lotus is falling, falling. The river is jeweled with autumn hues. Long, long the wind blows, long, long the night wears. Fain would I grasp the incredible. Oh! To fly away seaward and dream for a little. By its shores. To take from an island in blue ocean the six monsters. Alas, there is no such length of line. My hand caresses the surging wind, I am deeper drowned in sorrow. I will away. Away. Too strong is the life of men for me. There in the magical land of Penglai I will gather the grass of immortality. Tung-P'o. AD 712 to 770. Next to Liu Ch in the estimation of his countrymen stands Tung-P'o. His poetry is more finished in style than that of any Chinese master of the Tang period. Like many other poets of his age, he was also a painter and a friend of painters, notably of the soldier artist Qiang Tu. The wonderful horses of Qiang Tu's brush have long vanished, but Tung-P'o's poem remains and is worth quoting. The two horses are the envy of all sportsmen. They have the appearance of war chargers, which can hurl themselves, one against 1,000. Their white hair throws itself into the wind and dust. The others, quite as wonderful, resemble now a cloud, now snow whirling in space. Their delicate legs seem to run alongside the pine forest, whilst the spectators who see them pass applaud. In common with most Chinese poets, Tung-P'o had that haunting sense of sadness and regret for days gone by which the Portuguese call saudades, a word which has no equivalent in the English language. The reason is to be found in Chinese character and history. Already in Tung-P'o's time the empire had grown old and venerable. Dynasties had risen and set, cities and palaces had shrunk into grass-grown mounds. And to the Chinese the past has always been a cult, almost a religion. They realized the profound truth, more than any other nation, that no man can escape from his ancestors, though he flee to the uttermost parts of the earth. Ancestral voices are calling him. Fears, hopes, and passions long forgotten still struggle for existence within him. By bell, book, and candle you may exorcise all ghosts, but the men and women of your race, these are the ghosts that are never laid in exile. Through the green blinds that shelter me, two butterflies at play. Four wings of flame whirl joyously around me and away, while swallows breasting to the shore ripple the waves they wander o'er. And I that scan the distant view of torn white clouds and mountains blue, lift to the north my aching eyes. 'Tis there the city lies. Chang'an arise. Arise. The ghost road. The winds and the pines are whispering. The river girds in its flight. My footfalls sound through ancient tiles, where grey rats flit from sight. What monarch raised those palace walls? Who knows today his name? Who left beneath yon precipice the stone rack of his fame? Like jets of dusky blue I see ghosts from the gloom arise. Down the forgotten road return strange rumors and faint sighs. The thousand voices of the void blend to a chant bizarre, and the purple leaves are carpeted for autumn's avatar. The death-doomed legions thunder past in the wake of fleeting years. I fain would drown their tramp with song, but all my songs are tears. Sailing across Lake Emeipai, Sensan and his brother delighted to dream in grand horizons. They drew me down to the water's edge, there. Fellow wanderer. Veiled was the sky and sombre the land, and sudden the change from daylight. The wind rose and the storm waves seemed to be rolling pale gems in the foam. Our boat shot forth from its moorings and rippled into the movement. Great was the scene, inspiring to song, but the dominant note was fear. How should I not be stirred with danger surging around me? Treacherous wind and crested wave, is there no escaping you? Lo, now the captain unfurls the silken sail to the breezes, and the boatmen begin to rejoice as the last cloud flags away. The wildfowl rise with a roaring of wings, scared by the chant of oarsmen. Lute and flute are astir, faint harmonies drip from the sky. Bright are the water lilies' leaves as though the rains had burnished them. The slack line slips through my hands that would fathom the soundless lake. My gaze falls on the vast expanse of the limitless void before me. Rearward menacing, dark, Chongnan towers out of sight. Southward the mountains brood above the restless waters. Their grim reflections, trembling, sink in deeps of darkening blue. The sun sets, the boat glides by the cloud pavilion pagoda. And soon the moon is mirrored in the dun dusk of the lake. 'Tis then the black dragon, breathing pearls, looms out of the darkness. 'Tis then the river god beats the drum, and the shoaling monsters rise. The naiads leave their dim retreats, faintly their revels find us. And the pale streamers of their quickened lutes gleam for an instant far away. Han Yu. AD 768 to 824. One of the wittiest and most brilliant of the Tang statesmen and philosophers, Han Yu's poetry has been overshadowed by his prose essays, which have been upheld as models of Chinese literature. He attempted to found a new school of Confucianism, being a bitter opponent of the Buddhist tendencies of his day, and was banished to a semi-barbarous region which he set to work to civilize. Tung-P'o, the great Sung poet, wrote a magnificent poem to his memory which has been translated by Professor Giles, cf. Chinese Literature, page 161. Disappointment. Still moonlight floods the inner gallery, where the japonica sets fluttering her silvered petals. Languidly I rise, and let my absent glance fall where the shadows of the swing over the doorstep dance. I am possessed by spring's rough humid winds that penetrate the silken curtains of my lonely state, and cannot rest for all my sorrow. During the night I hear the heavy rain crash on the lotus pool afar. Tomorrow, ah tomorrow, the little boat lies swamped that I would fain have steered in search of the golden nenufar. Chü-i. AD 772 to 846. One of the greatest statesmen that China has produced. Chü-i comes nearer to our idea of a poet of the Romantic school than most Chinese writers. Yet even when he tells the story of the Emperor Ming Huang and the Lady Yang Kuei-fei, the one supreme love romance of China, he deals with issues that endure beyond the curtain fall on tragedy. For him the final crisis is never attained. A wrong done has results beyond the reach of time. For a fuller account of this poet cf. A Lute of Jade, page 73. In Yungyang. I was a child in Yungyang. A little child I waved farewell. After long years again I dwell. In world-forgotten Yungyang. Yet I recall my playtime. And in my dreams I see the little ghosts of Maytime waving farewell to me. My father's house in Yungyang has fallen upon evil days. No kinsman o'er the crooked ways. Hail me as once in Yungyang. No longer stands the old moot hall. Gone is the market from the town. The very hills have tumbled down, and stoned the valleys in their fall. Only the waters of the Chin and Wei roll green and changeless as in days gone by. Yet I recall my playtime. And in my dreams I see the little ghosts of Maytime waving farewell to me. Rain at dawn. At dawn the crickets shrill, then cease their playing. The dying candle flickers through my eaves. Though windows bar the wild dust and the rain, I hear the drip, drip, dripping on the broad banana leaves. Myself. What of myself? I am like unto the sere chrysanthemum that is shorn by the frost blade, and, torn from its roots, whirled away on the wind. Once in the valleys of Chin and Yung I rambled at will. Now ring me round the unfriendly plains of the wild folk of Pa. O galloping dawns with youth and ambition riding knee to knee. Ride on, youth, with the galloping dawns and dappled days. I am unhorsed, outventured. I, who crouch by the crumbling embers, old, and grey, and alone. One great hour of noon with the skyfaring rook, I clanged on the golden dome of heaven. Now in the long dusk of adversity, I have found my palace of contentment, my dream pavilion. Even the tiny twig of the little humble wren. Morning studies. Smooth and white the walls that ring the pool. Carefully swept the rosewalk's mossy green. Across the water dimpling winds blow cool. Where lotus leaves as large as fans are seen. What does yon flower-bright pavilion hold? Simply a lute and there a song inscrolled. To the sound of dropping pearls I turn the leaves. Playing, swaying beneath the spell the soul of autumn weaves. Thus quietly the morning studies end. And so I wait my friend. The little crow. The little lonely crow. Hovered around a little empty nest. Waiting and wailing for the mother breast. Ah! Cold and far afield she cannot hear the call incredulous of death. And so it lurked in the old forest for a year. And through the night its little piteous cry brought tears to all who wandered nigh. As though in broken song it would repay the debt of life to her who silent lay. All other nestlings know a mother's care. Thou, only thou shalt find not anywhere. Nor warm dark wings fold down on thy despair. At 41. The waters from the pool are vanishing. A mellow sunlight steeps the window panes. And autumn winds ply many a pleasant fan. O gold and green, half-ripe, the acacias glow. While o'er the threshold of his summer falls the shadow of a solitary man. A night on Lake Tai. Water and sky, as dusk folds down, together blend in a gray-green mist. Clear silhouettes of the trees are limned on a sunset of rose and amethyst. Moon doth creep from the bed of the deep paling. The storm-black waves afar. Through frosted rushes ripe oranges are gleaming. Golden star on star. I am void of cares and affairs, so happily drink. And dream in peace. Loud and shrill may the reed pipes trill, when they touch my heart they cease. But my 10 little painted ships tonight, where shall they anchored lie? At the foot of the Tung-Tianji mountain, on the cold deep breast of Lake Tai. Ouyang-Su. AD 1007 to 1072. Ouyang-Su, chief minister of state 1061 AD, was one of the two foremost poets of the Sung dynasty. His poems, which have been all too little translated, are remarkable both for their exquisite imagery and coloring. Together with Sung Chü-i, he produced the history of the Tang period. CFA, Lute of Jade, page 111. Return. You far away, you know. That when the wine cup reddens o'er the lake. I call to you 1,000 leagues apart. From the sheer confines of the world, and lo! All golden for your sake. Spring dimples through the doorway of my heart. The pavilion of abounding joy. Red trees, green hills in the sunset, and steppes of boundless grass. Oh, little the pilgrim reckons of the spring about to pass. In front of the joy pavilion, in the drift of scented showers. To and fro I come and go on a carpet of fallen flowers. Wild geese. When wild geese leave the uplands lone. The frost turns sand and rock to stone. When over Chang Nan they scream. Pale leaves go drifting down the stream. Broad is the water, heaven leans low. Sullen and dun the cloud racks show. When north winds tear the ragged sky. Their taper files go whistling by. Bell Hill. In the ravine the water wanders through. Soundless it laps the stems of tall bamboo. Westward a tiny strip of green all scrolled. With fairy pennons flaunting, red and gold. Oh rare! Oh delicate is spring! Thatched roofs face one another. All day long. Silent I dream. No bird breaks into song. The very hills are slumbering. Songs of the night. In flowing crowds. The moon-born clouds. Cast their light shade. O'er stairs of jade. And all the moonlit ways are one. Shining in silver unison. Yet who can read aright? The mystery of night. 2. Springtime, and sounds of the streaming waterfall. Deep night, on shrunken hilltops spreads her pall. The moon steers through a maze of pines, and lo! 1,000 thrusting peaks are set aglow. 3. In the cold water the collected snow melts, and the frozen stream begins to flow. The laughing girls slip homeward through the dark. While sand birds will around the fishers bark. Su Tung-P'o. AD 1036 to 1101. Together with Ouyang Su, Su Tung-P'o ranks as the foremost poet of his age. His whole career is curiously similar to that of the older poet. Both were statesmen, and both suffered on account of their uprightness and independence at a time when morality in public life counted for little. Su Tung-P'o, after holding high office, was ultimately banished to the island of Hainan, where he held the obscure post of subprefect. Here many of his best poems were written in lonely exile. Dreaming at Golden Hill. The stranger merchants faring from the east. Muffled in cotton robes, have met to feast. They drink, they revel, and they part at will. While moonlight floods the towers of Golden Hill. The third watch comes, the tide begins to flow. A fair wind follows, and in dreams I blow. The reed pipes, and have sailed to far Yangchao. At the Quangyalai pavilion. Red-skirted ladies, robed for fairyland, all have flown. But my heart to the wail of their long reed pipes lilts on. Their clarion songs, mid the wandering clouds were blown. The tiny-waisted, dreamily dancing girls are gone. Farewell to Chao Tielin. Long do I sorrow that the spring should end. Fain is the host to stay the parting friend. When for a while the dull routine is done. We statesmen idle in the sun. The kettle yields its stream of golden tea. And warm winds spread the odors of congee. Finished the cup, faded the crimson peach. Twilight, the green embankment leveled to the beach. My boat is pulled along the shore and soon. In the pure night unlanterned we recline. Until, caps off to conquering wine. We nod, the dream companions of the moon. On the river at Hushung. Beyond the twilight grove some sprays of peach bloom charm the lingering days. In spring, when first the waters warm, the wild duck on the river swarm. When Artemisia lights the land, young reeds break through the dappled sand. Liu Tzu-Hui. Circa AD 1100. Listening to the harp. Night and the midway moon. Some hidden lute sounds from a silken alcove. As the wind swells and recedes, the litany now swells, now falters, now commingled with the clouds. It throbs betwixt the earth and moon. Almost like gentle mockery the echoes fall, as laughter breaks on tears. The hand that sways the crowded chords I see not, but the heart, made visible by music far away, spells me her dreams. Ah! Mourns she not the tryst, new made and newly broken, but the old, lost love of long ago? Her melodies are secret sorrows welling through the lute, are captive nightingales escaped in song. One touch of the chords, and snowflakes scatter round. One, and the flowing brightness of the sun passes. Perchance she grieves that few may hear and understand. The floating dust collects beneath her silver nail tips. Lone is she, as orphan phoenix calling, with whose plaint the songs of all birds fail to harmonize. Autumn moonlight. Not yet has the cool moon topped the hill. White are the floating clouds that fill half heaven's void, while to and fro by the veranda windows go my halting steps that pause as though stilled for the sound of one I love. The flying brightness shimmers through the grove, and, mirrored on the pine-ringed pool, makes her dream waters beautiful. Now autumn's purest alchemy anew quickens the moonlight and distills the dew. And silence, coiled more closely round my walls, strangles each tiny rumor that befalls. Wen Tung. Circa AD 1100. Morning. Sunbeams through twinkling pinewoods cast their shadows on my window screen. A night of clouds and rain is past, and, newly blue and freshly green, the dawn rebuilds my world at last. Pear tree and plum tree shed their burden sweet, and children's happy voices rouse the street. Evening. Now pale flocks glimmer as they wind along. Into the deep ravine the herd goes down. The cold dumb pool awaits the nightly throng of wild geese wailing through the twilight brown. With jars of new-made wine old farmer Wang gladdens the neighbors. Gloomy faces shine, and dark robes kindle to the flush of wine. Liu Yu. AD 1125 to 1210. A distinguished official who also made a name for himself as poet and historian. Song of Three Gorges. From the 12 hills of the witches I see the 9 peaks rise. Beyond my prows a myriad tints flush autumn's empty skies. Untrue the legend, morning clouds, and evening rain. The howling of gibbons in bright moonlight fills the plain. When long June days begin, I wander to Nanpin, and moor my boat to a little quay, where monkeys swing from tree to tree. Now shadows gloom Chu Yuan's grey memorial, and by the tomb of you red roses fall. Liu Ch. Circa AD 1150. Autumn thoughts. Moonlight. The floating mists are gone, a wind unveils the deep clear night. Star rivals star, and the silver river draws to her breast the dreamy light. Gaunt old trees cast shadows on the plain. Little birds hushed by fear are stirring, singing again. And my heart is a tumult of song, and a torrent of wild wings shaking free. Home, 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 I hear the long Shrill of the far cicada calling me. On waking from sleep. At noon comes rest from the long routine. I launch my boat on the lilied pond and float. Till I drift without will into sleep. Green shadows lattice the waters green. Courtyard and house the silence keep. Then a bird breaks over the mountainside. And falls and calls from the crimson coronals. Of the woods that awake to her cry. My silken robes in the wind float wide. O wings of delight, draw nigh. Draw nigh. Anon. From the Sung Collection. Riding by moonlight. From the tall hilltop some great star. Falls to the west afar and afar. Out of the glistening gorge below. The orient moon swims full and slow. Hair disheveled and sleeves blown wide. Into the kind cool night I ride. Faint winds free strange scents anew. Moon-paled maples bright with dew. Dripping dreams from bough to bough. Sigh to my lute, why sleepest thou? Hands on the waiting strings fall mute. Lo, my heart answers, I am the lute. Liu Chi. A.D. 1311 to 1375. The most celebrated of the poets belonging to the Mongol period, Liu Chi was also one of the foremost adherents of the rising dynasty of Ming, and eventually became censor and under-secretary of state to the first Ming emperor. The jealousy of rivals, however, pursued him, and in the end he was poisoned by his rival the prime minister, Hu Wei-yung. There is little depth in the poems of Liu Chi, but much charm and considerable feeling for natural beauty. A contemporary critic has described his poems as wind-blown petals. The Convent of Shangfu. So I sprang to horse at cockcrow all a fever to depart. Galloped to the convent, ere the calling bells were still. Over dimpled lawns a zephyr woke the lily's jeweled heart. And the moon's faint crescent faltered down the cleft of wooded hill. Oh, the lonely little convent with its secret haunts of prayer. With its shadowed cells for dreaming, where eternities abide. Down the cedar-scented alley not a footfall stirred the air. But the monk's low droning echoed in the green gloom far and wide. Night, sorrow, and song. The rain's in the air. And the winds arouse. Shaking the cinnamon boughs. And the begonia's gay parterre. Raising dust and wreathing mist. Whirling all things where they list. Leaves in many-colored showers. Bright petals of innumerable flowers. Knocking at all doors they're hustling. Sets the silken curtains rustling. Till, as shrunken draughts, they creep. Into the shrouded halls of sleep. Raise the hair and ruck the skin. Of the startled folk therein. I am grown weary of my lonely state. Tired of the tongueless hours that wait. Dreaming of her whom skies of blue. And twilight eons hid from view. Swiftly the waters take their flight. Grandly the mountains rise. Yon birds that taper to the skies. Why have they lost their plumage bright? Would they might bear my messages of love. Alas! The trackless heavens unroll above. From west to east the river flows. But the waves return not to my calling. Once more the rare magnolia blows. But hour by hour her flowers are falling. My jasper lyre is laid apart. Hushed for a while the lute of jade. I hear the beating of my heart. And watch the moon lean down the glade. Then, ere the shadows wane. Out of the night's unrest. Ballad and old refrain. Lure me to seek again. The dream-built isles of the blessed. Yang Chi. Circa AD 1400. A native of the province of Jiangsu, Yang Chi became a district magistrate and afterward secretary to the Minister of War, by whom he was sent into the province of Shanxi as Treasurer General to the forces. He suffered the fate of so many Chinese officials, being impeached and falsely accused and finally condemned to lifelong exile, during which the following suggestive little poem was written. Lines written in exile. As pure as autumn water falls the dew. And cool of night is born when faintly sighs. The wind, that outcast of the twilight, dies. And the green gloom of random grass anew covers the undulating shores. I see, far out upon the lake, an island gleaming, with a girdle of red nenuphar, and, dreaming, I fill my sail, O dreams, in search of thee. Cold eyes of strangers follow me, and fears start with the trumpet from the ramparts blown. And on my darkened robes are sewn 2 pearls, my tears. Anon. Circa AD 1700. The following 2 poems are anonymous, and belong to the Manchu period. They are but 2 of a series of flower studies endowing each flower with a fragrant personality of its own. The delicate beauty of the Chinese originals is almost impossible to reproduce. Plum Blossom. 1 flower hath in itself the charms of 2. Draw nearer and she breaks to wonders new. And you might call her beauty of the rose. She too is folded in a fleece of snows. And you might call her pale, she doth betray the blush of dawn beneath the eye of day. The lips of her the wine cup hath caressed. The form of her that from some vision blessed starts with the rose of sleep all glowing bright. Through limbs that ranged the dreamlands of the night. The pencil falters and the song is naught. Her beauty, like the sun, dispels my thought. Calacanthus flower. Robed in pale yellow gown she leans apart, guarding her secret trust in violet. With mouth that, scarce unclosed, but faintly breathes. Its fragrance, like a tender grief remains. Half told, half treasured still. See how she droops from delicate stem, while her close petals keep their shy demeanor. Think not that the fear of great cold winds can hinder her from bloom, who hides the rarest wonders of the spring, to vie with all the flowers of Chang Nan.